10 Native American actors who made history in Hollywood. Actors who didn't just appear on screen, but kicked down doors in an industry that rarely made room for them. These are the performers who turned silence into presence, token roles into unforgettable moments, and background parts into leading voices. Through decades of being stereotyped, sidelined, or completely erased, they carved out space with raw talent, cultural pride, and fearless persistence. This list is not just about fame, it's about impact. It's about those who stood tall in an industry that often looked right past them, and who changed the course of representation with every role they took. From groundbreaking performances that earned standing ovations to quiet, powerful roles that rewrote expectations, these 10 actors reshaped Hollywood forever. Jay Silverheels, the face behind the mask. Before anyone knew what Native American representation in television could look like, there was Jay Silverheels, stoic, sharp-eyed, and saddled with one of the most iconic yet controversial roles in TV history. He was the man behind Tonto, the faithful companion to the Lone Ranger. But beneath the buckskin and broken English lay a story far more compelling than anything ever written into the script. Born Harold J. Smith on the Six Nations Reserve in Ontario, Silverheels began life as a natural athlete and gifted lacrosse player, but his destiny wasn't in sports, it was in the spotlight. Hollywood found him in the late 1930s, drawn to his commanding presence, but hesitant to let him speak. Native actors at the time were often reduced to stereotypes, silent warriors, nameless extras, plot devices in someone else's story. And then came Tonto. Yes, the character was problematic, molded by the biases of the era, and written with little understanding of Native cultures. But Silverheels gave the role dignity, and more importantly, he gave Native audiences someone to see on screen week after week, in homes across America. He became a cultural paradox, both a breakthrough and a limitation. And he knew it. Off-screen, he pushed for change. Silverheels co-founded the Indian Actors Workshop in the 1960s, mentoring young Native performers and fighting for roles that offered more than cliches. He was one of the earliest to use his platform to demand authenticity, and he did it at a time when few were listening. Jay Silverheels wasn't just Tonto, he was the crack in Hollywood's wall. The first voice in a long-overdue conversation. And though history has often tried to keep him in the saddle, riding beside the masked man, those who look closer will see him for what he truly was, a trailblazer, and the beginning of something bigger. Chief Dan George, the Quiet Thunder. His voice was calm, almost delicate, but it carried the weight of centuries. Chief Dan George didn't need to shout to command attention. He simply spoke, and the room listened. An elder in every sense of the word, he stepped into Hollywood not as a man chasing fame, but as someone carrying a truth the world had long tried to ignore. Born in 1899 on the Burrard Indian Reserve in British Columbia, Dan George lived through the brutal arc of colonial assimilation. As a child, he was sent to a residential school, stripped of language and culture. But what others tried to erase, he carried quietly, like embers, until the world was finally ready to see them reignite. He was already in his 60s when Hollywood noticed him. No glamour, no agent-engineered rise, just a raw, commanding presence. Then came Little Big Man, 1970, where he played Old Lodge Skins with such profound wisdom and quiet defiance that the Academy could no longer look away. At 71, he became the first Native American nominated for an Oscar. A soft-spoken revolutionary in a world still addicted to caricatures. His performances were never performances in the traditional sense. They were reminders of what had been lost and of what still endured. When he delivered lines, it felt less like acting and more like ceremony, words weighted with ancestral breath. And while Hollywood often wanted to typecast him as the noble savage, Dan George pushed against it. He was a published poet, a chief of the Tsleil-Waututh Nation, and a voice for Indigenous dignity, long before it was considered marketable. Chief Dan George was not loud. He didn't need to be. He was the storm you never saw coming, and the echo that still lingers long after the screen fades to black. Will Sampson, the silent force. He didn't speak a word for most of his most famous role, and yet the silence Will Sampson carried said more than 1,000 scripts ever could. Towering at 6'7", with a presence that felt more elemental than theatrical, he didn't just step onto the screen. He loomed, haunted, and quietly commanded every inch of it. When audiences first saw him as Chief Bromden in One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, 1975, they didn't just remember him, they felt him. Sampson was no trained actor. He was a painter, a rodeo rider, a full-blood Muskogee Creek man from Oklahoma who had never stepped in front of a camera until his late 30s. But director Milos Forman wasn't looking for an actor, he was looking for truth. And Samson brought it with him, unfiltered and grounded. As Chief Bromden, a character thought by others to be deaf and mute, Samson gave a masterclass in quiet resistance. His stillness wasn't passive. It was defiance wrapped in dignity. His character's final act wasn't just a plot twist. It was a moment of liberation so deeply earned that it felt spiritual. Hollywood took notice, and more roles followed. The outlaw Josie Wales, Orca, and others. But Samson didn't just act. He protected Native identity in film. When the producers of The White Buffalo planned to cast non-Native actors in sacred roles, he threatened to walk and forced them to hire Native talent. He saw the camera as a powerful thing, and he wasn't about to let it distort the sacred. Well, Samson never chased celebrity. He chased respect. In a business that often confused noise with power, he showed that true force can move through silence, unshakable, undeniable, and unforgettable. Russell Means, the activist who walked into the frame. Before Russell Means ever stepped in front of a camera, he had already lived the kind of life that movies rarely dared to tell. A warrior in the modern age, a thunderous voice for Indigenous sovereignty, and a lightning rod for change, Means was never meant to play supporting roles. Whether on the steps of the U.S. Capitol or on the set of a major film, he was always the same, unapologetically Indigenous and absolutely unignorable. Born on the Pine Ridge Reservation in South Dakota, Means spent years battling systemic oppression, not with weapons, but with words and action. As one of the founding members of the American Indian Movement, AIM, in the late 1960s, he helped lead some of the most defining protests of the era, including the historic occupation of Wounded Knee in 1973. The media painted him as dangerous. Hollywood eventually saw something else, a presence too powerful to ignore. His acting debut came in The Last of the Mohicans, 1992, where he portrayed Chingachgook with such deep intensity that many forgot he was new to film. There was a raw authority in his eyes, not the product of acting school, but of real-world resistance. He didn't play characters, he embodied them. Every scene was infused with a lifetime of fighting to be heard, seen, and respected. Means was never content to be a figurehead. He used film as another front in the cultural battle, pushing for Indigenous stories told by Indigenous people. He once said, "Hollywood has always portrayed the Indian as the loser." He made it his mission to change that. Russell Means didn't just appear in movies, he interrupted them. With every role, he forced audiences to reckon with a reality too long ignored. In a world full of performances, his was truth, blunt, blazing, and impossible to look away from. Tantoo Cardinal, the woman who wouldn't disappear. In an industry that thrives on forgetting, Tantoo Cardinal refused to vanish. While Hollywood offered Native women roles as ghosts, victims, or one-dimensional spiritual guides, she stood her ground and demanded something else, to be seen fully, fiercely, and without apology. For decades, she has been the quiet storm behind some of the most important moments in Indigenous cinema, and still, she remains defiantly rooted, not as a relic of representation, but as a living, evolving force. Born in Fort McMurray, Alberta, of Métis, Cree, and Dean descent, Cardinal understood early what it meant to be erased. Her very identity was considered a problem by the systems around her, but instead of shrinking, she expanded. She studied, she worked, and she became one of the most prolific Indigenous actresses in North American history, long before the world was ready to recognize her. You might have seen her in Dances with Wolves, Legends of the Fall, or Smoke Signals. Or maybe in the recent Killers of the Flower Moon. She's been there through it all, not as a token, but as a foundation. While others came and went, Cardinal built something. A body of work. A reputation. A standard. Her strength lies not in outshouting others, but in outlasting them. She plays women with weight, matriarchs who carry the scars of history and the fire of survival. And in doing so, she offers something revolutionary. Indigenous women who are complex, flawed, funny, fierce, and human. Tantoo Cardinal didn't wait for the industry to change. She endured it. She reshaped it from the inside, role by role, decade after decade, until the camera could no longer look past her. In a landscape that tried to erase her story, she stayed, stood tall, and wrote her own. Wes Studi, the warrior with words. Some actors enter a scene. Wes Studi enters like a verdict. Controlled, unshaken, and carved out of something ancient. His presence doesn't ask for attention, it demands it. For decades, Studi has been the embodiment of stoic power on screen. But look closer, and you'll find something far more complex. a man who has spent his career rebuilding what Hollywood has spent generations getting wrong. Born in Oklahoma and a proud member of the Cherokee Nation, Studi didn't come to acting through privilege or pedigree. He came through fire. A Vietnam veteran and activist, he understood both the brutality of conflict and the quiet resilience required to survive it. That layered experience shows in every role he touches, from stone-cold warriors to wounded elders, from historic icons to modern-day survivors. His breakout came in Dances with Wolves 1990, but it was The Last of the Mohicans 1992 that cemented his screen legacy. As Magua, he didn't play a villain. He played a man forged by betrayal, loss, and vengeance. He was terrifying because he was real. And for many, it was the first time a native character in a Hollywood epic felt fully human and deeply unforgettable. Studi went on to portray figures like Geronimo, lead roles in major films, and bring indigenous characters into the spotlight with gravity and nuance. He never let himself be boxed into Hollywood's limited definitions. Instead, he expanded them. In 2019, the Academy finally caught up and awarded him an honorary Oscar, the first Native American actor to ever receive one. It was long overdue, but Studi didn't need a statue to prove his place in history. Every role he's taken has been a strike against erasure and a step toward something truer. Wes Studi isn't just a warrior, he's a witness. And he's made sure that, from now on, Hollywood has to listen. Graham Greene, the soul beneath the surface. There's a quiet ache in many of Graham Greene's performances, something unspoken that lingers between the lines. He doesn't need dramatic monologues or explosive moments to make an impact. He does it with a glance, a pause, a breath held just a second too long. Greene is not the kind of actor who insists you watch him. He simply gives you no choice. Born on the Six Nations Reserve in Ontario, Greene came to acting later in life, but when he arrived, he did so fully formed, as if he'd always been waiting just off camera for his cue. His breakout role came in Dances with Wolves 1990, where he portrayed Kicking Bird with a calm wisdom that earned him an Academy Award nomination, one of the few Native actors to ever receive such recognition. But for Greene, it was never about awards. It was about truth. In Greene's hands, Native characters were no longer symbols or story tools. They were men. Real, bruised, sharp, funny, angry, forgiving. Whether in major films like The Green Mile or indie landmarks like Smoke Signals, Greene brought something essential: emotional depth. You didn't watch his characters, you understood them. His performances resonate because they're grounded. There's no trace of performance for performance's sake. Every gesture feels lived in, every line earned. He often plays characters pushed to the edge of someone else's story, but instead of fading into the background, he roots them so deeply in the moment that they become unforgettable. Graham Greene doesn't seek the spotlight. He lets the work speak, and what it says is often more powerful than anything a script could write. In a career that spans decades, genres, and mediums, he's remained consistent in one thing: revealing the soul beneath the surface. And that, more than anything, is his legacy. Irene Bedard, the voice that echoed across generations. When Irene Bedard speaks, you listen, not just because of her voice, but because of everything behind it. Soft-spoken yet unwavering, she became a voice for an entire generation, quite literally, when she was cast as the lead in one of the most widely recognized animated films of all time. But to define her by one role would be a mistake. Bedard's impact reaches far beyond a single character. She has spent her entire career breathing life into indigenous stories that the world often tried to silence. Of Inupiat and Métis heritage, Bedard was raised between Alaska and the lower 48, a child of multiple nations with a foot in many worlds. That duality would come to define her acting, a balance of strength and vulnerability, tradition and modernity. Her breakout came in 1995 as the voice and physical inspiration for Disney's Pocahontas, a role that brought Native presence into the living rooms of millions, though not without controversy. But while the film wrestled with historical inaccuracy, Bedard gave her performance depth, dignity, and emotional truth, a flicker of authenticity in a space where it was desperately needed. She didn't stop there. In Smoke Signals, she was electric, portraying a Native woman with sharp humor, sharp pain, and sharper insight. In The New World, Into the West, and Rutherford Falls, she continued to dismantle the flat portrayals of Native women that Hollywood had grown comfortable with. For Bedard, acting has always been about reclaiming the narrative, giving voice to the voiceless, putting spirit back into roles long hollowed out by cliché. Her performances are often subtle, but the resonance is deep. She reminds us that power doesn't always shout. Sometimes it simply speaks and never stops echoing. Adam Beach, the firebrand with a smile. Few actors carry both fire and vulnerability the way Adam Beach does. He walks into a scene with that unmistakable energy, youthful, restless, magnetic, and yet, just beneath the surface, there's always a storm brewing. He's the kind of actor who makes you lean forward because you know something real is about to happen. Something honest. Something raw. Born on the Dog Creek Reserve in Manitoba and raised in Winnipeg, Beach is of Saulteaux descent. His path to the screen was not a straight one. His early life was marked by tragedy, but he channeled that pain into a determination that could not be ignored. When he arrived in film, he arrived fully, not with polish, but with truth. It was Smoke Signals 1998 that lit the spark, a landmark native-written, native-directed, native-acted film where Beach gave a performance that was funny, broken, and completely unforgettable. Suddenly, Native youth saw someone on screen who didn't just represent them, he was them. Flawed, searching, grieving, and still cracking jokes. Hollywood came calling. In Wing Talkers 2002, Flags of Our Fathers 2006, and Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee, Beach proved he could carry the weight of blockbuster roles without losing the beating heart of his characters. He brought intensity to every part, but never abandoned his identity to do it. Even in ensemble roles, he stood out, not because he stole scenes, but because he anchored them. Off-screen, Beach has spoken out for better representation and more control over Native narratives. He knows the weight of the images we see and the cost of getting them wrong. His career has been a constant balancing act between Hollywood and home, between expectation and truth, between heartbreak and humor. Adam Beach isn't just a Native actor. He's a leading man, and he's never stopped blazing the trail for those coming next. Michael Grey Eyes, the scholar of smoke and silence. There's something precise about Michael Grey Eyes, every movement measured, every word sharpened like it's been honed by history. He doesn't just play characters, he inhabits them with a quiet gravity that leaves a mark long after the screen goes dark. Equal parts actor, scholar, and choreographer, Grey Eyes represents a new era of Indigenous performance, one that refuses to choose between intellect and instinct, art and activism, story and truth. Of Plains Cree descent and born in Saskatchewan, Grey Eyes began his career not in front of a camera, but on stage as a classically trained dancer with the National Ballet of Canada. That foundation in discipline, in body control and emotional restraint bleeds into his acting. There's power in how still he can be. And when he does speak, it's with a quiet fury that feels both ancient and immediate. His rise wasn't explosive, it was deliberate. Roles in Dance Me Outside and Skinwalkers marked his early screen work, but it wasn't until the last decade that Grey Eyes truly emerged as a commanding force. In Wild Indian, 2021, he delivered a chilling, introspective performance as a man haunted by a violent past, and it shattered expectations of what Native cinema could look like. No feathers, no drums, just trauma, guilt, and a refusal to be pitted. Then came Rutherford Falls, Firestarter, and Killers of the Flower Moon, each role different, yet all unmistakably his. What Grey Eyes brings is nuance. No stereotypes. No romanticized wisdom. Just deeply human characters navigating complex worlds. But his work doesn't end on screen. As a professor and director, he pushes for Indigenous stories told with precision, depth, and autonomy. He's building frameworks, not just performances. Michael Grey Eyes is the future unfolding in real time, a craftsman of the highest order, carrying the weight of generations with intellect, grace, and fire just beneath the surface. These 10 actors are more than just performers. They are storytellers, culture bearers, and history makers. Each one has stepped into an industry that often wasn't built for them and carved out a space not just for themselves, but for the generations still to come. Through resilience, talent, and an unwavering sense of identity, they've turned the lens back toward the truth, showing us that Native stories are not relics of the past, but living, evolving, and deeply human. Their journeys haven't been easy. They've navigated an industry that too often demanded stereotypes over substance, silence over truth. And yet they've endured, some by kicking open the door, others by quietly refusing to disappear. Together, they've reshaped the face of film and television, one role at a time. But the work isn't finished. Native actors today still fight for visibility, for complexity, and for the right to tell their own stories without compromise. By honoring the contributions of those who came before, we help create a path forward for those rising now. So if this video moved you, inspired you, or opened your eyes even a little, let it be the beginning of a deeper conversation. We invite you to share your thoughts in the comments. Who impacted you the most? Whose story surprised you? Which native actors do you believe the world needs to see more of? And if you want to see more content like this, thoughtful, respectful, and rooted in truth, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell so you never miss a story that matters. Because honoring the past is powerful, but building the future? That starts with us.